Private Reeves sneered at the lieutenant's faded tattoos peeking beneath her collar. He didn't recognize the 173rd Airborne's emblem, nor the scarring around it from where she'd cauterized the ink herself after capture. General Walsh's arrival changed everything. Spotting her, he snapped WarHawk with such reverence that coffee cups stopped mid-sip. Reeves paled hearing the name. The legend whispered at the academy about a pararescueman who'd jumped into an active volcano zone to retrieve satellite intel. Only now did he notice her fingers lacked prints, burned off gripping hot steel during escape. The new recruits shuffled through Forward Operating Base Cyclone's motor pool, their boots kicking up fine dust from the oil-stained concrete. Lieutenant Crenshaw knelt beside a Blackhawk's rotor assembly. Her sleeves rolled past elbows, mottled with shiny scar tissue. The burns climbed her forearms like wax drippings, disappearing under her collar. Private Reeves nudged the soldier beside him, nodding toward the lieutenant, as she adjusted a torque wrench with fingers missing their fingerprints. "Looks like someone failed fire safety training," he muttered. His squad stifled laughter as Crenshaw's wrench clicked twice against a bolt head. Precise, measured. She didn't look up. Technical Sergeant Ruiz cut through the group with a clipboard tucked under one arm. "Save the comedy for the USO show, gentlemen." His words carried less rebuke than caution, his eyes darting between the recruits and Crenshaw's hunched form. The lieutenant kept working, though the veins on her right hand grew pronounced as she gripped the wrench. When the recruits moved on, Reeves glanced back to see her wipe her hands on a rag folded precisely at her knee, the motion revealing a patch of puckered skin where her thumb met palm. Nightfall brought stillness to the motor pool save for the hum of a single floodlight. Reeves detoured past Equipment Shed 3 to shortcut to the barracks and saw Crenshaw through the wire-reinforced window. She cradled a small frame in both hands, her thumbs brushing the glass in slow arcs before she snapped it shut inside a tool cabinet. Reeves caught a glimpse of desert camouflage and 4 silhouettes in night vision goggles before the cabinet clicked locked. He stepped on a loose gravel chip retreating. Crenshaw's head turned toward the noise, but she didn't call out. The next morning's chow hall buzz included exaggerated theories about the lieutenant's injuries. "Heard she got caught in a fuel dump explosion," whispered one private through a mouthful of scrambled eggs. Another argued, "Nah, that's interrogation scarring. Saw that pattern on a POW at Fort Sam." Their platoon sergeant sipped coffee silently, his gaze fixed on the officer's table where Crenshaw's assigned seat sat vacant as always. Reeves noticed the sergeant's knuckles whiten around his mug when someone suggested she'd been fragged by her own unit. Pre-dawn PT found Reeves lagging behind his squad on the running track, lungs burning in the thin desert air. A rhythmic thumping overtook him. Crenshaw lapped the group at a steady 6-minute mile pace, her left pant leg riding up to expose a carbon fiber prosthetic strut with each stride. She finished 20 minutes before the recruits, waiting at the finish line with hands on hips. Up close, Reeves saw fresh blood blooming through her collar where scar tissue had split. She dabbed it with a gauze pad from her pocket, the movement automatic, and walked toward the showers without limping. Back in the motor pool, Reeves watched Crenshaw dismantle a damaged servo actuator with tools she handled like extensions of her fingers. Her movements were exact, despite the missing fingerprint ridges, sliding between wires and gears as if reading them by touch. When she stood, the hitch in her step barely slowed her as she carried the assembly toward the test bench. The recruits pretended not to stare as she calibrated the unit, her head tilted to compensate for what Reeves suddenly realized was a missing left earlobe concealed by her hair. Sergeant Ruiz appeared beside him, tracking Crenshaw's path across the bay before saying, "She could teach most of our instructors. Probably has." The following evening, Reeves opened the commissary fridge to find Crenshaw loading protein shakes next to the MREs. Her right sleeve had rolled back to reveal a tattoo blurred beneath scar tissue, numbers, maybe coordinates, rendered unreadable by healing burns. She closed the fridge and walked out, leaving Reeves staring at his warped reflection in the stainless steel until his buddy jostled him. "You ask her about her war stories yet?" the private joked. Reeves shook his head, remembering the locked photo in the shed. That night, he heard rubber-soled footsteps pass his barracks window at 330, regular as a metronome, heading toward the empty running track. By week's end, the motor pool rumors had grown wild enough that even the mechanics started listening. A crew chief swore Crenshaw had snatched a pilot from a downed F-16 in enemy territory. A fuel specialist claimed she'd survived 3 days in a burned-out armored vehicle. Reeves noticed increasing numbers of senior NCOs accidentally passing through Crenshaw's work area. Their nods of greeting holding weight the recruits didn't understand. During an engine test, Master Sergeant Delgado rested a hand on her shoulder while pointing at a readout, a gesture Reeves had never seen him make with any other officer. When Crenshaw stepped away, the sergeant's fingertips lingered halfway between reaching and saluting before dropping to his side. Rain slicked the tarmac on inspection day. Crenshaw oversaw the helicopter tie-downs, her rain jacket flapping open to show a shirt darkened at the collar by fresh blood from her reopened scars. Reeves watched her reject 3 fuel lines for microscopic cracks the other technicians had missed. "Standard's the standard," she told a protesting crew chief, her voice carrying no inflection as she tagged the parts for replacement. The chief opened his mouth, then closed it when he saw the set of her jaw. Under the hangar lights, the scar tissue on her neck shone like old wax. Reeves looked away first. Every evening, at 2100, a bird call whistle sounded near the motor pool perimeter. 2 notes, sharp and artificial. Reeves spotted Crenshaw lifting her chin at the noise before resuming inventory logs. Following the sound led him to Sergeant Ruiz leaning against a Humvee, tossing a burnished knife from hand to hand. The blade caught the sunset as Ruiz said without turning, "Some stories aren't yours to hear, Private." He pocketed the knife and walked away, leaving Reeves staring at the orderly rows of rotor blades in storage, each aligned within a finger's width of perfect spacing, Crenshaw's work from that afternoon. The pattern stretched into the dusk, precise as rifle sights. The motor pool generator troubleshooting session became mandatory after 3 drones lost power mid-flight. Colonel Varnes pointed at a schematic projected onto the makeshift briefing room wall, tracing a red line across what he claimed was a faulty circuit path. Lieutenant Crenshaw stood near the exit, arms crossed, her posture relaxed but eyes locked on the slide. When the colonel concluded his assessment, she cleared her throat. "That's the A-model wiring diagram, sir. Our birds have the C-model upgrade." She didn't raise her voice, but the room fell silent as she stepped forward and rotated the slide 90 degrees. "The feedback loop crosses here." Her finger touched a junction most officers wouldn't have noticed. Varnes blinked, then nodded, making the correction without argument. None of the majors seated near Crenshaw reacted. Their stillness suggested they'd expected this. Reeves intercepted her after the briefing. "Since when do motor pool LTs know Black Op drone specs?" he demanded, blocking her path near the tool racks. Crenshaw reached past him for a socket wrench set, her movements unbothered by his proximity. The wrench handles clanked together when she tossed them onto the workbench behind him. "Generator 3's acting up again." She didn't look at him as she spoke, instead checking the calibration on a voltmeter. "Fix it first, then ask about qualifications." The generator housing felt like a furnace against Reeves' knees as he peered inside. Oil streaks marked where others had attempted repairs before him. Crenshaw watched him fumble with the intake manifold bolts for 2 minutes before kneeling beside him. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, disassembling the fuel pump assembly in half the time Reeves would have taken. She didn't explain the steps, but her body blocked the view from curious onlookers, giving him space to observe. Her left prosthetic rasped against the concrete when she shifted position, yet her fingers never hesitated between tools. "Pressure sensors reading false positives," she noted, tapping a component smaller than a thumbnail. When Reeves squinted, he saw the microscopic crack running through its casing. That evening, Reeves found the records room door ajar. Sergeant Ruiz sat hunched over a filing cabinet, flipping through folders marked with red borders. The overhead light reflected off a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the room's chill. Reeves stepped on a creaking floorboard. Ruiz spun and slammed the drawer shut, but not before Reeves glimpsed a folder labeled "White Out," resting atop mission reports dated 3 years prior. "You got business here, Private." Ruiz's voice carried an edge Reeves hadn't heard during training exercises. When Reeves mentioned Crenshaw's name, the sergeant's jaw clenched. Some questions flattened the asker. He moved to leave, then paused at the threshold. "Her file won't tell you why she walks funny anyway," he muttered. "That came after." The next morning's duty, rosters listed Reeves for motor pool inventory, Crenshaw's domain. She assigned him to catalog spare rotor components without comment. Reeves worked slowly, watching senior staff interact with her throughout the morning. A master sergeant brought her coffee without being asked. Two specialists waited 15 minutes to ask her about a torque spec rather than consulting the manuals. When Major Hendricks arrived to inspect the WarHawk fleet, he deferred to Crenshaw's assessment of the tail rotor assemblies without hesitation. Reeves checked the personnel files that night. The computer screen cast a pale glow across his face as he scrolled through Crenshaw's service record. 18 blank months separated her last deployment from her stateside reassignment. The status column read, MIA, presumed Kia, for that period, followed by a single-line update. Status revised. Return to duty. No location codes. No theater designations. Reeves minimized the window when footsteps approached outside the admin tent. Drone maintenance continued to dominate the week's schedule. Crenshaw oversaw the installations of new optical systems, her knowledge of the equipment exceeding the manufacturer's reps. During a lunch break, Reeves noticed her sitting alone at an otherwise empty picnic table, picking at an MRE with utensils held strangely in her scarred fingers. A pediatrician's daughter from his platoon observed the grip from afar. "That's how people eat after significant hand burns," she murmured. "They relearn based on what doesn't hurt." Reeves watched Crenshaw rotate a plastic spoon between thumb and ring finger, her movements deliberate yet fluid. Ruiz found Reeves cleaning weapons later that day. He leaned against the armory wall, spinning that same burnished knife from earlier across his knuckles. The blade looked Soviet in design, its pommel wrapped with fraying paracord. "Still curious about the lieutenant?" he asked. When Reeves didn't answer immediately, Ruiz flipped the knife into the dirt between them. "She carried 2 of my guys down a mountain with that leg barely attached. Found us water where maps said none existed." His boot scuffed the knife's edge lightly. "Took this off a Spetsnaz captain during extraction." Reeves waited until dusk to visit the base memorial wall. The engraved names stretched across 30 feet of polished granite. Near the end, freshly cut letters stood out from the weather-smooth surface. Operation Whiteout, 12 names. Below them, a 13th etching showed signs of recent modification. Someone had carefully altered the date beside Crenshaw's name to match the others. The memorial's caretaker shuffled past with a weed trimmer. "Family requested the correction," he offered without being asked. "Took 18 months for the paperwork." He moved on before Reeves could question him further. Motor pool duties continued revealing odd details. Crenshaw rejected replacement parts 3 times after noticing microscopic inconsistencies. She diagnosed engine issues by sound alone during morning inspections. During a particularly grueling generator overhaul, Reeves noticed her prosthetic leg lacked the standard military issue markings. The carbon fiber bore only a handwritten serial number near the ankle, partially scratched away. When he mentioned it to a veteran mechanic, the man paused his welding torch. "Custom job," he assessed. "The kind you get when standard issue won't hold up." He didn't elaborate, but that night Reeves found Crenshaw running laps again, her gait slightly more uneven than usual. Administrative signatures told their own story. Every form Crenshaw completed used the identical penmanship Reeves had noticed that first day, precise, angular strokes that matched perfectly with older logs in the motor pool records. The files dated back 5 years, though Crenshaw's official service record showed only 3 at Cyclone. Reeves compared maintenance logs during night watch, tracing how the same handwriting appeared sporadically even before her supposed arrival at the base. Some entries correlated exactly with the 18 missing months from her file. Training intensified as the week progressed. Crenshaw ran recruits through emergency landing drills until they could field strip a crashed drone in under 15 minutes. During a simulated comms blackout exercise, she navigated the team through rocky terrain using only the stars, her head tilted at an odd angle. Reeves realized compensated for peripheral vision loss on her left side. When a private joked about her lazy eye, Sergeant Ruiz pulled him aside with enough force to leave bruises. That evening, Reeves caught Crenshaw alone in the equipment shed again, studying that same photograph of 4 soldiers in desert gear. This time, she didn't hide it when he entered. The frame's glass reflected the overhead light just enough to obscure the other faces, but the figure on the far left wore sleeves rolled up to reveal tattooed forearms, intact and unburned. The motor pool transformed overnight. Every tool rack gleamed with fresh oil, each workbench scrubbed free of grease stains. Reeves spent 6 hours polishing the same torque wrench 3 times before Crenshaw passed inspection. She moved through the prep work with quiet intensity, rejecting 3 crates of 5.56mm ammunition for inconsistent primer Satinga flaw most armorers would have overlooked. When the supply sergeant protested, Crenshaw lined 20 cartridges on the counter and rolled them simultaneously. 2 stopped short of the others. "Try again tomorrow," she said, already walking away. General Walsh's convoy arrived at 730 without fanfare. The 4-star moved through the inspection line with practiced efficiency, his aide taking notes on a tablet. Reeves stood at attention near the munitions locker, watching Walsh pause at each station just long enough to ask one precise question. The general's boots echoed on the concrete as he approached Crenshaw's workstation. She stood beside a disassembled drone guidance system, her sleeves rolled down despite the morning heat. Walsh's gaze locked onto the faded eagle tattoo peeking above her collar, 173rd insignia blurred by scar tissue. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice flattening, "that's an unusual placement for Division Inc." Crenshaw's hand drifted toward her neck, but stopped halfway. She gave a single shallow nod. Walsh turned abruptly to the base commander. "Let's see your maintenance logs." The change in direction sent staff scrambling. Reeves watched from the periphery as Walsh flipped through the motor pool records, pausing on pages with Crenshaw's distinctive angular handwriting. The general pulled a small notebook from his breast pocket, comparing something inside to the logs before snapping it shut. A private carrying toolboxes nearly collided with Crenshaw. "Sorry, ma'am," he blurted. Walsh's head jerked up at the honorific. Without breaking stride, he ordered all personnel below E6 to clear the area. Reeves lingered near the exit just long enough to hear Walsh's quiet question. "Volkov still have that knife you took from him?" The door swung shut behind him, cutting off whatever response Crenshaw might have made. Outside, the dismissed junior enlisted clustered in nervous groups. Reeves leaned against a Humvee fender, watching through the motor pool windows as Walsh and Crenshaw continued their conversation. The general's posture had shifted, his shoulders looser, one hand resting on his belt near where a sidearm would normally hang. Crenshaw stood with her weight evenly distributed despite the prosthetic, her responses short but not clipped. At one point, Walsh gestured toward her left leg. Crenshaw shook her head and said something that made the general rub his temple. Sergeant Ruiz materialized beside Reeves, smelling of gun oil and fresh starch. "Told you some questions, flatten the asker," he muttered. He tossed Reeves a set of keys. "Go inventory the spare parts trailer, far side of the compound." The dismissal was clear, but Ruiz hesitated before leaving. "Whatever you think you saw in there, it's not even the prologue." The spare parts trailer's interior smelled of mildew and WD-40. Reeves worked slowly, counting each O-ring and gasket twice. Through the trailer's grimy windows, he could see Walsh's inspection team moving toward the command post, the general walking slightly apart from his staff. Crenshaw wasn't with them. At 1,500 hours, base-wide recall sirens wailed. Reeves sprinted to the assembly area, arriving as the base commander took the podium. General Walsh stood beside him, his expression unreadable. Behind them, Crenshaw waited at parade rest, her uniform cap casting shadows over her eyes. The commander adjusted his microphone. "Effective immediately, Lieutenant Crenshaw will be assuming duties as acting base executive officer." Murmurs rippled through the ranks. The commander continued over them. "All personnel will afford her the same respect accorded to field-grade officers." Dismissed. The motor pool that evening was quieter than usual. Technicians spoke in hushed tones, glancing toward Crenshaw's now vacant workstation. Reeves found Ruiz cleaning weapons in the armory, his movements methodical. "They promoted her just like that?" Reeves asked. Ruiz didn't look up from the M4 he was disassembling. "Wasn't a promotion." He set the bolt carrier group aside with more care than necessary. "Just stopped pretending." Later, near midnight, Reeves spotted Major Crenshaw, now walking the perimeter fence alone. Her gait was uneven in the moonlight, her left sleeve rolled up to expose the full length of scarred forearm. She paused near the memorial wall, touching one name briefly before continuing her rounds. The security lights caught the edges of her tattoo as she passed beneath them, the eagle's wings seeming to shift with her movements. Morning brought formal orders transferring Crenshaw to the command staff. Her replacement in the motor pool, a fresh-faced captain, spent his first hour searching for maintenance records that should have been on the shared drive. "They're in the red binder," Reeves heard himself say. "Third shelf." Lieutenant Major Crenshaw kept hard copies. The captain found the binder exactly where described. Inside, every maintenance log for the past 3 years bore Crenshaw's precise handwriting, including entries dated during her 18-month MIA period. Reeves watched the captain flip through pages, his frown deepening. "These can't be right," he muttered. "This inspection date was during Operation Whiteout." Across the motor pool, Sergeant Ruiz caught Reeves's eye and shook his head once. The message was clear: let it lie. Reeves returned to inventorying fuel pumps, but his hands moved automatically, while his mind replayed Walsh's question about the knife. That evening, he checked the base archives. Operation Whiteout's after-action reports were classified above his clearance level. The system did yield one result: a medal citation for extraordinary heroism during extended isolation behind enemy lines. The recipient's name was redacted, but the date matched Crenshaw's missing 18 months. The motor pool never quite returned to normal. Technicians still glanced at Crenshaw's old workstation when difficult problems arose. Reeves caught himself reaching for the red binder twice during complicated repairs. One afternoon he found Ruiz in the equipment shed, staring at the framed photo Crenshaw had often examined. The glass was cracked now, but the 4 soldiers in desert gear remained frozen in time: 3 men and a woman, their faces obscured by tactical gear, except for the woman's unmistakable 173rd Airborne tattoo. Ruiz replaced the photo without comment and walked out, leaving Reeves alone with the realization that some soldiers carried their histories in ways no personnel file could capture. When new shipments arrived the following week, Reeves noticed the ammunition crates bore fresh inspection stickers, each one initialed in familiar, angular handwriting. He ran a cartridge across the workbench like he'd seen Crenshaw do. It rolled perfectly true. The emergency assembly siren cut through evening chow at exactly 1,830 hours. Reeves jogged to the parade ground, still wiping MRE gravy from his lips, joining a formation buzzing with confused murmurs. The base commander stood rigid at the central podium, flanked by General Walsh and Lieutenant Crenshaw. No, not a lieutenant anymore. Reeves blinked as Walsh reached over and plucked the double silver bars from Crenshaw's collar, revealing the burnished oak leaves of a major underneath. The general's fingers lingered a half-second too long on her epaulette, his usual command presence replaced by something approaching reverence. "This is Major Elena Crenshaw," Walsh announced, his voice carrying across the silent ranks. The honorifics pause that followed was so precise, Reeves could hear a desert breeze rattle loose chain-link fencing. "Call sign WarHawk." The reaction cascaded through senior NCOs first. Ruiz's back straightened so sharply his spine cracked audibly. 3 master sergeants in the front row exchanged glances that conveyed entire conversations. Walsh nodded to a technician by the flagpole. A projector screen flickered to life behind the podium, displaying grainy thermal footage from what looked like a nighttime mountain pass. "Some of you owe her your lives," Walsh said as the video showed 4 heat signatures moving cautiously through terrain. "Even those currently picking crumbs from their teeth while whispering about her scars." The infrared footage jumped suddenly to chaos. Muzzle flashes erupted across the screen, the camera shaking as shouts overlapped in the background. A red-hot figure dragged 2 others through crossfire, their thermal signatures pulsing erratically. Reeves squinted. The rescuer's left leg glowed white-hot where the prosthetic had taken rounds, yet they kept moving. When the figure turned briefly toward the camera, the outline of a 173rd Airborne patch shimmered briefly before catching fire. That extraction was Operation Pale Horse, Walsh narrated, as the footage showed the soldier carrying a limp Form 1, armed up a scree slope. Major Crenshaw's team was ambushed, retrieving intelligence that prevented 3 embassy bombings. The general pointed into the crowd at Ruiz, whose face had gone gray beneath his tan. She carried you through that valley for 6 hours after the helicopter turned back. The scars? Walsh waited as the video showed their heat signatures crossing an area where the ground itself glowed orange. Active sulfur vents. Evac couldn't land on terrain hot enough to melt boot soles. The screen shifted to a medical tent. 2 medics worked on a charred human shape, while a third held up IV bags. The figure on the table raised a blackened hand, fingers visibly missing prints, and pointed urgently toward where 3 other patients lay. Reeves realized he was breathing through his mouth to avoid tasting the phantom scent of burned flesh the footage evoked. Walsh shut off the projector with a click that echoed across suddenly silent ranks. That prosthetic leg she adjusts every morning? The original shattered taking shrapnel meant for Sergeant Diaz. A massive master sergeant in the front row lowered his head. The neck scars mockingbirds whisper about? From interrogations where she bit through a leather strap rather than give up Pale Horse survivors' locations. Crenshaw hadn't moved during the presentation, her posture unchanged from parade rest. Only when wind caught her sleeves did Reeves notice her forearms flexing rhythmically, likely the same muscle memory that kept dragging wounded soldiers up that mountainside. Fresh blood darkened her collar, where old scar tissue split under tension. The general stepped aside, gesturing to the base CO who produced a small velvet box. Effective immediately, Major Crenshaw assumes duties as Cyclone's executive officer. The commander opened the box to reveal a combat action badge with unusual gold detailing. This authorization comes directly from JSOC. Reeves had never seen a cab with that configuration before. Neither had the lieutenant beside him, whose whispered, "What the hell is that?" hung in the electric silence. Any questions? Walsh surveyed the formation, his gaze lingering on clusters of junior enlisted who'd been particularly vocal at mess hall gossip sessions. None came. The general gave a minute nod and turned to Crenshaw. "WarHawk, anything to add?" She stepped forward, her prosthetic clicking once on the concrete stage. "The drones need recalibrating after today's sandstorm. That was all." Dismissed personnel moved like sleepwalkers. Reeves caught Ruiz wiping his face with a camouflage sleeve, leaving clean streaks through the dust. The sergeant noticed him staring and shook his head slowly, a warning not to speak. Nearby, 2 privates who'd invented increasingly elaborate theories about Crenshaw's burns stood frozen near the exit. Their earlier bravado evaporated. Back in the barracks, Reeves found his bunk neighbor examining his own unscarred hands. "That sulfur field on screen?" the private whispered. "Would have boiled our eyeballs in 3 minutes." Reeves recalled Crenshaw's morning habit of testing wind direction before PT, always positioning herself upwind of the formation. He pulled a footlocker toward his cot and noticed fresh scratches near the lock. Someone had tried forcing it while he was at formation. Only one item inside warranted theft attempts, the notebook where he documented inconsistencies in Crenshaw's service record. He flipped it open to find a single page torn out cleanly, leaving behind a faint impression of angular handwriting matching the motor pool logs. At midnight checks, Reeves spotted Crenshaw. No, Major Crenshaw now, walking the flight line alone. She paused near a grounded Blackhawk, running fingers along rotor damage that matched footage from the briefing. Her head tilted at the same slight angle from the navigation exercises, compensating for whatever that prisoner knife had taken besides fingerprints. The next morning's drills were unusually quiet. When a private dropped a wrench during aircraft inspection, the clatter made half the hangar flinch. Crenshaw supervised the session as always, though technicians now addressed her with the rapid precision usually reserved for explosive ordnance. Only Ruiz interacted normally, handing her a steaming thermos without breaking his explanation of torque specs to wide-eyed privates. Reeves waited until the major left for the command post before approaching the crew chief. "You knew." It wasn't a question. Ruiz spun a socket wrench slowly between scarred fingers. "Knew she pulled 6 guys from that valley who wouldn't have made it otherwise. Knew she walked 13 clicks on a shattered prosthetic to get Diaz to the LZ." He set the wrench down carefully. "Didn't know they gave her back to us until she showed up in my motor pool 3 years later missing half her skin." The mess hall buzzed when Crenshaw entered for the first time that week, her tray holding the same rations as everyone else. Conversations stuttered as she passed tables, though Reeves noticed senior NCOs subtly adjusting their posture when she neared. She took her usual seat, the empty one beside three permanently vacant chairs that now made terrible sense. A butter knife clattered to the floor near Crenshaw's table. When the clumsy private stooped to retrieve it, he froze with his face level to her prosthetic leg. Reeves saw his lips move, likely reading the scratched-in markings barely visible beneath the carbon fiber. The private stood too quickly, knocking over his drink as he backed away, his face pale. That afternoon's maintenance logs needed Major Crenshaw's signature. Reeves volunteered to deliver them, approaching her new office with the same caution one might afford an armed grenade. The door stood ajar, revealing Walsh leaning against her desk, examining the same Soviet knife Ruiz had carried. Crenshaw stood at the window, her reflection showing the 173rd tattoo in full sunlight. "You kept that damn promise," Walsh was saying as Reeves paused outside. "Made Ruiz and Diaz write those field commissions personally." He flipped the knife, catching it by the blade to offer her the handle. "Still think you belong in a motor pool?" Reeves retreated before hearing the response, the maintenance log still clutched in his sweating hands. That evening, remote-operated excavators appeared near the memorial wall, digging foundations for a new plaque. The base florist delivered 3 fresh wreaths to the motor pool office marked Major Crenshaw, each ribbon embroidered with different dates but identical gold lettering. Operation Pale Horse. Nightfall found Reeves sitting on the empty bleachers, watching Crenshaw run laps alone again beneath floodlights. Her gait remained uneven but relentless, exactly like the figure in the footage who wouldn't stop carrying survivors up that burning mountain. When she passed closest to the bleachers, Reeves caught the rhythmic whisper of her prosthetic left footfall missing the crunch of gravel, before it faded into the desert dark. The motor pool buzzed with whispers in the days after Walsh's revelation. Reeves found Sergeant Ruiz cleaning weapons at dawn, his hands moving in precise strokes along an M4 barrel. Ruiz set aside the cleaning rod when Reeves entered. 47 days, Ruiz said without preamble. He rolled up his sleeve to show a thick scar running from elbow to wrist. "That's how long she kept us alive, after our WarHawk went down." His fingers traced the scar's uneven edges. "Used the knife from her survival kit to cauterize this when I caught shrapnel. Same one Walsh keeps in his office now." Ruiz's gaze drifted to the west wall of the armory, where a shadow darkened the concrete. "Pray you never learn how flesh smells when it's burning because someone's saving your life." At the infirmary, the base medic sorted through burn ointments while Reeves waited for his physical. "Neck scars like hers?" The medic tapped his own throat with a penlight. "Classic high-voltage burns. Interrogation technique favored by 3 particular enemy groups." He snapped off the light and threw it back into a drawer. "Fun fact, humans usually break after 8 seconds of contact." Her file lists 12 exposures, averaging 11 seconds each. The medic pulled out a chart with burned edges, its pages stuck together in places. No teammate coordinates given. No mission parameters disclosed. Just medical notes about maintaining consciousness through creative respiration techniques. He smiled without humor. "Google box breathing sometime." Reeves checked the base chapel on his lunch break. The POW memorial wall stood in a side alcove, its polished surface reflecting candlelight unevenly. He found her name halfway down the 3rd panel. Elena Crenshaw, with dates that predated her official return by 18 months. The etching showed signs of multiple corrections, the stone slightly lighter where previous dates had been ground away. A chaplain dusting nearby pews noticed Reeves staring. "Family requested the update," the chaplain said. "Took 3 appeals to get the records declassified enough for verification." His duster tapped a barely visible line below Crenshaw's name, Isaiah 43. 2 engraved in letters smaller than the surrounding text. Reeves didn't need to look it up. He'd seen the scorch marks on her boots. The rifle range fell silent when Crenshaw arrived for quarterly qualifications. The range master smirked as she loaded her magazine with scarred fingers. "No handicap rules here, Major." Crenshaw took position without responding, her prosthetic leg braced slightly wider than standard stance. She fired 30 rounds before the range officer finished explaining the revised scoring system. When the target slid back, all 30 holes clustered within the 10 ring, including one dead center through the previous record holder's bullet hole. The rangemaster examined the target through binoculars twice before posting the score. Reeves caught him studying Crenshaw's hands afterward, watching how she palmed spare rounds without dropping any despite the missing fingerprints. That evening, Reeves found Crenshaw repairing night vision goggles in the equipment shed. He stood at attention until she looked up. "About the mocking, ma'am, She cut him off with a raised hand. "Sit." Reeves knelt opposite her at the workbench. Crenshaw pulled a roll of duct tape from her toolkit and tore off an 8-inch strip. "Show me." When Reeves hesitated, she demonstrated, twisting the tape adhesive, side out around her own forearm with practiced motions. "Enemy strips you naked during captivity. These become snares." She tossed him the roll. "Adhesive holds for 14 days if you keep it dry." They spent 2 hours going through escape techniques, which plants yielded drinkable water, how to improvise compasses from belt buckles. Crenshaw's instructions came in short bursts between equipment repairs, her hands never stopping work even as she described surviving 4 winters without proper shelter. Reeves noticed she consistently positioned herself between him and the door, whether blocking potential eavesdroppers or gauging his reactions. He couldn't tell. Chow hall seating arrangements shifted subtly in the following days. Reeves watched older NCOs leave 3 chairs conspicuously empty at every meal, their trays carefully placed to prevent newcomers from sitting there. Crenshaw resumed her place at the table but never touched the extra utensils laid beside her plate. Only when a cocky private tried taking one of the reserved seats did Reeves understand. Master Sergeant Diaz physically lifted the kid by his collar and moved him aside without explanation. The private started to protest until Diaz pointed to faint initials carved near the chair's edge, JMSRTKL. Reeves found the same initials later that day, stamped inside the tool lockers Crenshaw maintained with religious precision. The base rumor mill churned about Walsh's pending Medal of Honor submission. Reeves accessed the recommendation paperwork accidentally while sorting files for the adjutant. 12 sworn affidavits filled the attachment, each recounting a different incident from the missing 18 months. The most heavily redacted account described Crenshaw dragging 2 wounded soldiers through a minefield, using their own belt webbing after her prosthetic leg detonated an anti-personnel device. Another detailed how she'd performed a tracheotomy on Ruiz with a sterilized bayonet during sandstorm conditions. Every surviving team member had signed in the same black ink that filled Walsh's signature block. Crenshaw herself remained in the motor pool more than her new rank required. She still rejected faulty parts with the same handwritten tags, though now the privates triple-checked components before presenting them. During a rare interview with Stars and Stripes, she declined to discuss the medal nomination. "Request continued assignment as Cyclone's maintenance officer," the published quote read. The article noted she'd lasted 7 minutes with the reporter before excusing herself to recalibrate a drone guidance system. Reeves saw the change in small moments, how new recruits stopped mid-sentence when Crenshaw passed, how the mess hall quieted when she checked her blood-stained collar in the reflective microwave door. Senior NCOs started carrying the oddest things, an extra canteen during field exercises, an additional trauma kit during convoys, exactly the resources listed in her survival lectures. The most telling transformation came at mail call, when a package arrived for Private Reeves containing 3 rolls of duct tape and an unsigned note reading, "Practice the twist." The eastern perimeter fence became Crenshaw's evening walking route. Reeves sometimes followed at a distance, noting how she paused near certain stretches of chain link, where desert gave way to rocky outcrops that could hide a person if they knew how to move. One night he found her sitting against a supply container, sketching something in a notebook with her less scarred left hand. She didn't acknowledge his approach but didn't hide the drawing either, a meticulous diagram of desert plants with symbols indicating which roots were edible. Reeves recognized 2 species from their earlier lesson. Weather turned colder as Crenshaw's retirement paperwork circulated. Snow dusted the memorial wall where her name had been updated. Reeves watched from the motor pool doors as she ran pre-dawn laps through the flurries, her breath coming in steady clouds despite the uneven terrain. The prosthetic left prints every 5th step, distinctive carbon fiber impressions marking her path in fresh powder until the wind erased them by morning formation. The new recruits arrived with the same confused glances Reeves remembered from his first day. They clustered near the motor pool entrance, whispering behind hands, as Major Crenshaw calibrated a Black Hawk's altimeter with scarred fingers that moved with mechanical precision. One pimpled private elbowed his buddy, and nodded toward her prosthetic leg, barely visible beneath her rolled cuff. Before the joke left his lips, Corporal Reeves stepped between them with coffee steaming in a chipped mug. "That's Major Crenshaw," he said, tapping his new insignia. The recruit straightened instantly at his tone, the same one sergeants had used on him months prior. Reeves sipped his coffee slowly, letting silence underscore the warning. Later, he led the wide-eyed group past General Walsh's office window. Inside, displayed beside folded flags, the Soviet knife from Operation Whiteout rested on a velvet stand. The recruits leaned closer to read the engraved plate. "Taken from Spetsnaz Captain Volkov, during urban extraction, Maj. E.S. Crenshaw." Reeves let them stare at the blood groove running along the blade before continuing the tour. He adjusted his collar absently, revealing the 173rd airborne patch stitched inside, where only deliberate inspection would find it the same placement Crenshaw used for her tattoo. Night training introduced the recruits to Crenshaw's field improvisation drills. She knelt beside a downed drone, her hands dismantling the wreckage into usable components. "Watch the servos," she instructed, extracting motor parts with minimal tool use. Within minutes, she'd assembled a rudimentary prosthetic brace from drone struts and hydraulic lines. The demonstration took 14 minutes. Reeves knew because he'd timed it against his own first attempt at 53. When a cocky specialist asked why someone with her record bothered with maintenance duty, Crenshaw tossed him a grease-stained blindfold. "Prove you can reassemble a Humvee transmission without sight first." The recruit fumbled with bolts for 26 minutes before Crenshaw removed the blindfold. She didn't critique his work, just pointed to where differential fluid pooled beneath the chassis. 3 other recruits stepped forward to help mop up the mess without being asked. Reeves noticed they avoided looking directly at Crenshaw's hands, where fresh blood seeped through makeshift bandages she'd torn scar tissue demonstrating pressure tourniquets earlier. Retirement paperwork appeared on the bulletin board the following week. Standard forms for terminal leave and benefits eclipsed by Walsh's handwritten edition. Medal of Honor ceremony all hands mandatory. The base buzzed with speculation about dress uniforms and possible presidential attendance. Crenshaw avoided the chatter by running extra laps before dawn, her prosthetic leaving faint divots in the frost that melted by breakfast. The ceremony unfolded under a slate-gray sky, heavy with unshed snow. Walsh stood at parade rest before ranks of silent personnel, his dress blues bearing the same combat action badge Crenshaw now wore. No politicians attended, no reporters milled with cameras. Just the base commander reading a citation detailing actions the recruits couldn't reconcile with the lieutenant who'd patiently corrected their torque wrench techniques. For sustained gallantry across 47 days of enemy territory evasion while preserving critical intelligence assets, the commander intoned, his voice cracking on the 7th minute of the citation. Reeves watched Crenshaw's posture remain rigid despite the cold exacerbating her scars. Snowflakes caught in her hair like metals she'd never wanted melting before they could accumulate. When General Walsh stepped forward with the Medal of Honor on its blue ribbon, Crenshaw's exhale fogged the air between them. Walsh murmured something that made her prosthetic foot shift almost imperceptibly before she accepted the decoration. The microphone picked up exactly 8 words from her response. For those who didn't make it back. Snow began falling in earnest as she stepped away, flakes swirling around the 3 empty chairs placed behind the podium. Post-ceremony, the motor pool absorbed Crenshaw back into its rhythm like she'd never left. She rejected fuel pumps with the same handwritten tags, though now the recruits triple-checked components before submitting them. Reeves found her one evening in Equipment Shed 3, staring at the cracked photo frame he'd last seen Sergeant Ruiz handling. All 4 faces were visible, now 3 men and Crenshaw, her pre-scarred arms dark with tattoos as her teammates grinned under night vision goggles. She didn't hide the image when Reeves entered, just ran a fingertip along the fractured glass, sealing their faces forever in that moment before extraction. New rotation delivered fresh recruits 6 weeks later. Reeves watched from the armory door as they laughed over MREs, their voices carrying across the mess hall. One made exaggerated limping motions toward another, who pantomimed burning his hands on imaginary shrapnel. Reeves set down his coffee and rolled up his sleeves, exposing the shiny patches where Crenshaw had taught him cauterization techniques on field-expedient training dummies. The joking stopped faster than it had for his cohort. At midnight perimeter check, Reeves found Crenshaw walking the fence line alone despite her retired status. She carried no flashlight, didn't need one with the moon glinting off fresh snow. They fell into step without speaking, boots and prosthetic crushing frost in alternating rhythms. Near the memorial wall, Crenshaw paused to brush snow from the names of whiteout casualties. Reeves noticed fresh scratches near the base where someone had recently added coordinates, likely the same ones tattooed beneath her scars. Dawn found Reeves inventorying duct tape rolls in the motor pool. He counted 3 extra that hadn't been there yesterday, their adhesive sides already prepped for quick deployment should necessity demand it. Outside, the first batch of trainees jogged past Crenshaw's usual PT route, their laughter dying when they spotted the carbon fiber impressions still pressed into the frozen earth left foot, missing every 5th step where she'd kept running, even after military protocol said she could stop. The metals that matter never gleam in glass cases. They show in scars worn like maps of wars most will never see. Major Crenshaw still walks Cyclone's perimeter at dusk, her uneven steps pressing coordinates into the dust that recruits now measure their respect against. Hit subscribe for more soldiers' stories written in wounds rather than paperwork. The mess hall still keeps 3 chairs, empty some traditions, outlast even retirement. Drop your base in the comments if you've served alongside someone like WarHawk, that corporal rehabbing the motor pool, the sergeant who limps but never complains. Their files likely hold chapters no metal could contain.